So these people were treating censorship as damage and routing around it effectively. And I think that's powerful because it tells you about what they want in a democratic sense. These people don't want to be filtered. They want access to things like Gmail. They want access to things like Twitter. And so we think that's working pretty well. But it's still a losing battle, right? Because at some point, China will get access to a full list of bridges. Maybe they'll compromise some machines. Maybe they'll start compromising users directly. That might be easy. I'm sure that it is, in fact, easy. You can go to someone's house and take their computer. The person doesn't really have much to go on. And it's hard to stay secure in that way. So at the moment, we're seeing a quarterly blocking event, which is pretty bad, I think, but it's going to get much worse if they speed up. And we're not at war with China. The Tor project is not at war with China. And we're not trying to bloody their nose in any way, but they're very fiercely searching for things to block. And it is a reality. So we have to deal with that reality that in some places, our services don't work as well as we like them to. And so we've been coming up with tactics to fix that. There's a really interesting thing that happens, and I'm sure it's apparently obvious by the last sentence in this slide. They actually take the consensus list, and then that's their block list. So what if all the Tor directory authorities consensed on all the IP addresses and port numbers of all of the embassies of all of the world where Chinese people had to apply for visas? What kind of uproar would that cause, right? So there are some interesting avenues for attacking back if we felt like it. We're not taking it there, but we could, because that's the kind of sloppy stuff that's going on here. It's just wholesale blocking of things. There might be some testing involved based on the fact that they seem to block by IP and port, but the testing might be, that's the IP and port we found in the consensus, not we connected and decided that was an undesirable service. So we think that that is an interesting thing. And that's the reality of China today. So I recently traveled to the Middle East, and I was kind of a little bit surprised to notice that while I was in Lebanon, that the proxy system that exists in Lebanon, one, exists, because I was told that it doesn't, and two, it was blocking Tor. So like, my ability to work there is really only possible because the objectionable content happens to be about getting around filters against objectionable content. So lucky me. But for all the rest of the people that were undesirables, but still somehow let into the country, they were having trouble with this. And I was very surprised to see that. So that's what it looks like, right? And you can tell a little bit about the filter by the message it returns, content underscore filter underscore denied. That looks like something you could find in some source code, right? Well, it turns out it's some Squid Web proxies, right? So there are the IP addresses, go to town, right? You have to reposition from inside Lebanon to reach them, but that's not hard, right? Lebanon is full of unpatched boxes. So this is Ojero, right? These things are so loaded, it's ridiculous. When packets pass through them and they go through the filter, you get an addition of like 1,000 or 2,000 milliseconds of latency, right? The amount of traffic passing through them is gigantic, as far as I can tell, and it's ridiculous. I mean, they just basically don't work. And these are super old, right? I mean, well, they're not as old as they could be, but as we know from the 26C3 from Fab's talk, we know that this is not good, right? There are a bunch of remotely exploitable bugs in Squid. And they force, in some cases, they force people through these proxies. So they're forcing people basically to open themselves up to like a whole security nightmare that they otherwise might not have. And this is actually the ISP because supposedly at the national level, they don't have filtering, right? There's no mandatory filtering. And we can also really easily find it. So I'll walk you through it, right? I know the DNS records right there are correct. Because I was able to tunnel out, I was able to compare what I got inside the country to outside of the country. There are some automated tools for doing this, but just for simplicity's sake, this is what is useful here. So there's the DNS request. We see torproject.org's DNS is not being tampered with. But then if you notice TCP traceroute, now ICMP tracerouting, you actually don't have this problem. Like you see, and maybe they're running Moxie's old traceroute tool that he wrote for faking traceroutes, but in this case, they totally screwed up, right? When you do a TCP traceroute, you actually see the fourth hop is this host that's supposedly in Austria, right? We're talking, I'm in Lebanon, I'm in Beirut. I'm not 4 hops from Austria, no matter how you count it. And so port 80 is just being returned by 4 hops upstream. So that's really easy to detect, right? And we can also look at the latency for that, which is kind of interesting. Like you'll note that there's some stuff in between there that's like a little bit overloaded. Like what is that, 2,500 milliseconds? Jesus, right? Port 443 behaves differently. That's a little more like it, right? You see 7 hops and we're in London. So it didn't actually tamper with the TCP connection going through entirely, right? So in the place where it decided it wasn't going to do man in the middle, it just let it through. And you could actually see the difference based on port number. So at some point, your packets diverge and get shunted off into another network. That's really easy to detect, right? It's really easy to automate this kind of test. Those people are amateurs. Their filters are crap. So it's also interesting because supposedly they're optional. But when I went to Cafe Tamarbuta, which is a leftist, anarchist type cafe in Beirut, I found that the filters were enabled. And when I asked around, nobody actually knew about these filters until I found just some kind of like random guy that worked at the cafe, and he's like, oh yes, I think we turned that on in order to save costs on bandwidth. The ISP told us we would be saving costs on bandwidth. So I don't know. I mean, in some cases, people choose this, but for almost everybody that entered the cafe and for many people at home, maybe it's on by default, maybe it's not on by default, your mileage may vary. I think it's kind of slimy to do that kind of filtering, and especially to do it so poorly and to put everyone at risk that travels through your filters. So in any case, if you want, the IP addresses are in the slides, you can take a look at them. This has got to be the most unfortunate name for an ISP in the Arab world. I mean, I understand that it's like EarthNet. I get that. I get the meaning. But Terranet sounds like a bad South Park joke, right? So it's Terra. Okay. So their proxy system is equally bad, but harder to detect. You can detect that it is in fact not what you would expect based on the fact that certain types of logins would reflect different IP addresses. And so in this case, we were going through a proxy 85.112.95.11, but at the local cafe, my IP address was 212.98.138.15. So for web traffic, I was again shunted to another proxy, and that proxy did content filtering. Of course, you can see again, what's that? 2 hops to California? Probably not. They were a little better though. If you note, the load on that proxy in terms of responding is really low, right? That's not 2,500 milliseconds. That's actually a little realistic. Like if you didn't know better, you might think that they actually had a really good quality of service. They don't. So this is Qatar. Well, traveling, this is when I went to meet with Al Jazeera. And in Qatar, the thing that I noticed was that they have a telecom monopoly, and lots of places in the world have telecom monopolies, so that's not special. But their filter is like so obvious. Like they didn't even try to hide it, right? They didn't even make a slight effort, which in a way is nice, right? They're transparent about their lack of transparency, basically, right? And that's nice. But the thing is that there's a reason for that. Your ability to make a difference in this society is pretty much none, right? I asked someone, how does a road get built here? And they said, I don't know. A road just gets built. You know, you're taken care of. Just think about that. Roll that over in your mind for a second, right? As the solution to civil engineering, you were taken care of. That could mean a lot of things in a lot of different ways. I don't want to be taken care of, probably, especially when you're going to bulldoze my home. That sounds like I might be in the house still. So, I mean, for me, I found that to be a little bit scary. So yeah, of course they're transparent about the fact that they're doing this proxying and this censorship because you can't do anything about it. They have a monopoly on the telecom, and if you want to resist, maybe you get arrested. It appears that my hotel was basically filtered by what's called Netsweeper, I think. Now I'm not 100% certain on this, but that URL down there at the bottom looks a lot like what Netsweeper's URL looks like. So the fact that they weren't masking it actually allowed me to unmask the Canadian company that's based in Toronto, Ontario, if that is in fact their software. You can also notice that you can apply like different filters, like username equals filters, and then the net block of my hotel. You can also tell some other things about it, which I think is kind of interesting because you can probe the filter, right? You can like try to go to certain other places and see, oh, is this web page blocked? So it's like super easy to automate a checklist for Qatar because Qatar uses, no kidding, censor.qa, right? proxy1.isp.qa and censor.qa. They're like, I mean, it's like if you look at Bahrain, it's the same. Only theirs is, I think, Anonymous is the host name for their TLD or something like that. But that's okay, right? Because hiding it isn't really going to make a difference. they don't care.